Hello everyone, my name is Avalon, and with Breath of the Wild 2 confirmed for next year, I want to talk about some things that I felt were missing from the first journey with the Hero of the Wild. So I've teamed up with How to Game Differently, with the hope that he'll rein me in when I start going on too much about dungeons, and hopefully I can stop him mentioning Pokemon.
And thank you for having me, Avalon.
On his channel we list 5 things that we want to keep in from Breath of the Wild 1, but let's look at the 5 things we hope that they add. The first thing that I want to see is an active story. One thing I found really disengaging was how the story was presented in Breath of the Wild 1. There was no real time pressure. You know, Zelda had held the Calamity for 100 years, and the actual events of the story that you do uncover during the game are from 100 or 10,000 years ago, and it just feels really predetermined. I understand that complete non-linearity makes it hard for a story to progress naturally, but I do hope they found a better way to do it in this next one. I'd like to have Link undergo a journey where he experiences the twists and turns in the present, he creates relationships in the present, and there's other small interactions like that that just increase the stakes for the final encounter. They are relevant to what is going on in that game and what you're finding out in that game. For example, in Breath of the Wild 1, clearing a divine beast doesn't really affect the story of that game at all. The beasts are out of control or whatever's going on with them, and bringing them back into control doesn't actually affect the villagers that are nearby them. Take, for one example, Varnaboris. That's the camel from the desert, for those who don't know the names because they're quite similar. So apparently Naboris has the chance of electrocuting random residents of that area. So when the Gerudo go out to hunt or get their food or whatever, then there's a chance they may not return because they might get zapped. Which is cool. You know, it's interesting to know that, you know, Calamity Ganon has taken over this thing and it's causing issues for people. That's fine. That all makes sense. However, once you clear it, Gerudo don't start, you know, appearing all over the place. There's no additional changes to their lifestyle, and again, I understand that would be challenging to really code into the game, but I'd like a bigger sort of direct impact that I'm having on those villagers. I'd like them to celebrate that I'd helped them through this hard time. And I know that there are some slight, tiny changes, but there's nothing significant that really gives that payoff. And that's something that I hope they can add in to Breath of the Wild 2.
So number 2 for me would be the lack of boss fights. You had the 4 different brights at the end of each of these dungeons. You obviously had Calamity Ganon at the very end of the game, and then you had Dark Beast Ganon, which, let's face it was one of the easiest boss fights in any of the Legend of Zelda game series. You know, you're using the light arrows, it's directing you where to fire them. You've been using the bow throughout the entire game, doing trick shots and everything. It was such an easy fight. And then with the overworld bosses, you had the stone taluses, you had the Hinoxes, you had that random fish thing in the desert, which I still don't understand why there's a random giant fish in the desert. And that's it. You know, all the other overworld bosses are just clones of the original ones, so once you know how to defeat one, you know how to defeat them all. Now, the boss that they actually included in the DLC for the final trial with the Monk Maz, that demonstrates what a proper boss fight is. You know, it gave you scale, it gave you unique different fight styles that they would change through. It was a fantastically designed character, whilst again the other bosses were just clones of each other. The Brights all looked the same. Calamity Ganon just looked like another Bright, just bigger. And Dark Beast Ganon just looks like the same old pig monster that we've always fought. You know, there's just no uniqueness. So for Breath of the Wild 2, I really hope that they bring in more boss fights and make them as unique as possible, because that was one of the highlights in the previous Legend of Zelda games. You know, it was just always so unique, the fights at the end of each dungeon or side quest or so on. It was fantastic, and I really wish that they bring that back into the Breath of the Wild 2.
For number 3, I'd like to see structured dungeons. Now, I know that this is not a new complaint, I know that I've complained about it before on my channel, I know that everyone needs me to stop complaining about it, I get it, I understand. However, the dungeons in Breath of the Wild are not good. And I know I get loads of backlash for that. Last time I actually had people, like, I'm a small YouTuber, I don't get people commenting, and I got comments on a video where I brought this up before. So I know, I get it. But I'm gonna hammer on James's point here when it comes to uniqueness, because the dungeons are all the same. There is nothing unique about them. All 4 dungeons have the same concept of you go in, you find the map stone, you rotate part of the dungeon, it changes the layout of the dungeon in some way, it doesn't really add any interest to it. They had so much potential. You had Varudania, who you begin and everything's pitch black and it's the fire one, so maybe you've got to create light using fire and stuff, but nope, you immediately turn on the lights and then it's the same as all the other ones. You rotate the lizard, everything's fine. You had Var Meadow, which had all of these wind currents. They could have done so much around wind, but they didn't. It was just rotate where the wings are, and it changes how things slide in the dungeon. Then you had Varuta, which again, same thing. It's a big elephant, you find the map stone, you move the trunk, it turns a water wheel. It doesn't... granted, that's slightly better, but it doesn't actually add much to anything. Now, like I previously mentioned, obviously, Varnaboris is actually really cool. So that does have a bit of a unique design to it, in that you have to rearrange the electric current, and it actually uses that to change, and you have to do it multiple times through the dungeon, and it's good. But that's the only example of any sort of critical thinking that went into the design of these dungeons. Visually, they're the same. Musically, they're the same. There's just nothing unique to them at all. Now, when it comes to Breath of the Wild 2, from what we've seen, it looks like there's going to be proper temples and proper dungeons, and I really hope they bring in something that makes them unique from each other. Like a unique theme, a unique element to base it around that actually does something different in different dungeons. I really need this, Nintendo, please. James, please bring this back on track.
So number 4 for me would be the way you obtain your heart and your stamina in the game. In Breath of the Wild, you had to collect 4 spirit orbs from the shrine challenges, bring them to the goddess statue, which would just be in a random location either in the middle of a town or out in the fields of Hyrule, and the whole thing was so tedious that you felt so inclined to complete these shrines just to get these orbs. And also getting the option of having a heart or stamina also kind of broke the immersion a little bit to me. Whilst in the previous games, to obtain extra hearts, you would either have to defeat a boss, and that will give you a full heart, or you'd find a random chest, either in a dungeon or a house, or just in some various different locations where you get a quarter piece, and you'd have to get the 4 quarters to get a full heart capsule. And to me, that was so much of a better way of doing it, and you could implement that for the stamina as well, because it was the excitement of not knowing what you're going to get. Whilst Breath of the Wild, it was so predictable, and I found it incredibly boring, and like I say, incredibly tedious as well, that you had to travel back to the stone statues as well as part of it, and also just remembering the locations of them. I would rather have the instant reward of getting a brand new heart from defeating a boss, or so on and so forth.
And like, you couldn't even have full stamina and full hearts. They didn't put enough things in the game for that. They put like a million things in the game, and then there was still, if you had full stamina, you could only have like 27 hearts or something like that, which, just give me all the hearts. Anyway, I digress. Finally, for me, it's gotta be the music. Now, I'm not saying that Breath of the Wild 1 didn't have good music, and it was really good to have something so beautiful and broken and camouflaged into the background of the world. It just kept everything kind of sweet and pleasant, and I appreciate that those songs were other big songs that were slowed down and broken up, and it was really beautiful. But it did lack some of that sort of heroic adventure epic music that you're so used to in Legend of Zelda games. Now, from the opening of the advert that we got at the Nintendo Treehouse event, I do have a lot of confidence that there's some good stuff coming, and I really hope that there's some significant dungeon themes and area themes that are really obvious and defined and distinguished, and I just really hope that they make something more memorable from the music. Again, I'm not saying that Breath of the Wild 1 had bad music. I really liked how the music was, and I think it worked for the game. I just want something more. Anyway, there's 5 things that we'd like to see added into Breath of the Wild 2 that weren't really in Breath of the Wild 1. Like I said, James has a video on his channel about 5 things that were in Breath of the Wild 1 that we want to see them carry forward. Drop a comment below if you think there's something we've missed, or maybe you just disagree with us completely on one of these points. Or if there's something you wanted to see carried over, then pop over to James' video and comment about it there.
Oh, and something I didn't actually include into this is that I really hope that Breath of the Wild 2 brings in Pokemon, because you know, you could have all the different Pokemon in different regions. You know, you could have Snorlax just wandering around.
James, I've got to stop. James,
stop. And you have to figure out how to wake him up.
Stop. Well, we all knew that rant was coming, and we managed to rein James in just a little bit. So, apart from that, I have been Avalon, he has been James, and I'll see you guys next time.